Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by and welcome to part three's final set of Project Orchids updates. This set was Cattleya's and Tolumnias. I think the Tolumnias got stuck in with the Cattleya's because there wasn't room with the other Oncidium types because that had far too many plants in it. We started this set with 6 plants. Well, we didn't end with 6. Let's see how we got on with this little set then. Okay, first up then, Brasov Little Stars. This was bought from Speciotic Plants of eBay in October 2018 and mounted straight away. So in December this was a new plant. It had some roots. I wouldn't say it had a good root system, but what it did have was a couple of failed new growths, which was a trifle worrying. But nonetheless it was mounted, and it did have some signs of spikes, so it looked like it was going to come into bloom, but basically it needed to grow a new root system. It needed to get going and grab a hold of that mount, so that was my main concern, whether it bloomed or not. Once we actually got to February, we did get some blooms, and we had signs of not only some new roots but some signs of some new growths, just eyes starting to move, nothing sort of exceptional at the time, but I was pleased to see the new roots. That was important. By the time we got to May we did get some good roots and we had more new growths starting to push out, some pushing on and more to come, so it looked like it was taking off okay. I was certainly pleased with the amount of new roots that were starting, so coming on nicely. By the time we got to September, the roots had really pushed on, and so had the new growths. So, you know, I think the plant it was half as big again as it was when I got it, so it had grown incredibly well through the year up to this point. So pleased with the progress of this one. Let's see what this looks like today. Okay, looking at this one today, trying to film the current clips in between heavy rain showers and poor light, but it looks like it might brighten up as the day goes on. This is very convenient because the holy clay pots and the mounts need watering today, and all of this section are one or the other, so that's good. So the Brasov Little Stars has come on well this year. That's not part of the video. Let's get my coffee out of the way. What we've now got is a very good root system, firmly attached to the mount, absolutely grabbed hold in many places, so an excellent root system now. The new growths have pushed on and matured and are currently in spike, so we've got quite a few spikes on the plant, so it's going to bloom in the not too distant future. It's got some older leaves on it, and some of these leaves that are chopped were chopped when I got it, but the leaves are still there, so they still serve a purpose even though they don't look very elegant. This one's had scale and managed to get hold of some of the leaves, left some marks, but I'm working on that. I won't say I've got rid of every single one on the plant, but not far off now. They're difficult to find, let's put it that way, whereas a while ago they were obvious, so we're dealing with that. So this one will come into the bloom in the not too distant future. That doesn't change its status with me though. It is still a plant to go, the reason being that where it lives it needs very bright light to bloom and grow well. The only place I can give it that is up where my vandas are. And quite honestly, up there, I've got limited space and it's in the way. And the blooms don't do a lot for me. Brasov blooms in some cases can be very, very nice. But I should have known better when I got this via its name, Little Stars. And as Brasov blooms go, they are quite little compared with some of the others. I may look for a different type to replace this one down the line. But it will need to be a performer with, you know, large fragrant blooms that last well. These blooms are fragrant, night fragrant, and they do last reasonably well, so it's got that going for them, but they're just small in comparison to some of the others, so it is still on the list to go. Whoever gets it will get a pretty good plant. It's mature, obviously blooming size. This is its second lot of blooms since I got it, and it's growing well, firmly attached to the mount. The wires could come off and it'll be perfectly happy. No signs of new growth at the moment. That's going to happen either during the blooming or shortly after, so it will come into growth next year. And given the number of leads on it, it should grow on really well next year. I think there's something like 5 leads, and this one has a habit of just starting a new lead anywhere it likes, basically from anywhere on the plant, as it did during this current growing season. So a good plant, pleased with its progress. It's done well for me, and we should get blooms down the line. Obviously they'll be in separate videos. So looking good, that one. Done well. Now this little Cattleya is a nice compact plant. It's got a name about 8 foot long. But nonetheless it was a controllable Cattleya. So lots of pseudobulbs, short rhizomes, and not too tall. So easily managed, shall we say. In December it was coming on quite nicely. Some new growths had matured. If you look in the centre there, the new growth there has a sheath, so expecting some blooms in the not too distant future. A couple of older leaves looking a bit tired, but nonetheless most of the leaves were in good nick, nice colour, and a reasonable root system since it was put in the holy clay pot, so it was doing okay. No problems with this one. When we got to February, that sheath had actually pushed up blooms. They were just opening, and it had done something strange around the back of the plant and pushed up 2 tiny little pseudobulbs, both of which had sheaths. This is unusual behaviour. There were no signs of leads in that area, and blow me, they actually bloomed. Despite being less than half the size they should be, they still managed to push some blooms out. So this was behaving a little strange. Nonetheless, blooms are blooms, and those bulbs came out in a strange place too. So moving on into September, the poor thing had a bad attack of scale, which I had to deal with. They got right in amongst the base of the pseudobulbs and up under the leaves, all over the place. But nonetheless, we had a nice new growth pushing out to the left at this point. And this little one with the 8 foot name, this one's had scale really bad. I'd like to say had scale, but in fact they're still there. And the problem is, unless you remove scale, get them off, you never know whether you're killing the same scale over and over again, because they'll hang on unless you physically try and remove them. So, I mean, if you look at that old pseudobulb there, those are probably dead. They've been treated, but they're still there, so they probably get killed again. But this one has done strange things. If we go round to the back where we had strange happenings during the year, and we had these 2 odd little growths that pushed up, and they did actually bloom, which was surprising, but nonetheless they created new leads. So what we've now got is another bulb, larger than this one, but not as big as it should be, but it's got a sheath. And this little one here is also producing a new growth. So I've now got 2 new leads round the back of the plant that I never had before. So add those to the growing points round the other side, or point as it happens. We've now got 3 leads going on this without any effort. The new lead here is pushing on. Scale damage on the leaves, flipping nuisance. It does have a sheath. There are lumps at the base of that sheath, so that's going to bloom. But this new growth is up to size. Nice big fat pseudobulb, the right size with the right number of leaves. So this side of the plant's behaving itself. We should get blooms on this here in the not too distant future, and possibly on those 2 new leads round the back, but they're going to be staggered this time. I would imagine this will be first, strongest lead, and then round the back can't feel any lump at the base of that sheath, but nonetheless the fact that this section is not quite right, single leaf on this one should be, this is a bifoliate by nature, and again, so these two strange growths, single leaves, one of which has died, help that off. But we do have two leads. It'd be interesting to see if that produces one or two leaves, because this section of the plant's now producing some new roots, so we'll get additional roots. The roots on this don't look very good, but they're there, and the best ones have gone down from this point, the front lead, and those are good roots heading off down into the pot. Some of them which may be coming out the side by now, I'm not sure. So we'll get blooms on this in the not too distant future. Gorgeous blooms on this one, and with 3 leads, obviously in that small holy clay pot, it's going to outgrow its welcome in that pot in the not too distant future. So it's going to have to go in a bigger pot at some point. So there will be root damage getting it out of this pot. In theory, I could just break that pot, put the whole thing in a bigger pot with new media around the outside, but I'm not breaking a holy clay pot for the sake of a repot. If I time it right when the new roots are growing or new roots are starting, then the damage to the older roots doesn't matter so much because it's going to replace them. So we'll get onto that sometime next year at an appropriate point. But blooms to come sometime down the line. Not the best looking plant. Older leaves going now, yellowing. But once they start to yellow like that, they drop off. They might leave a leafless pseudobulb behind, but that doesn't look as bad as the leaves as they start to fade and go. You know, the yellowing leaves do sort of spoil the look of the plant. But nonetheless, some of the previous bulbs have still got good leaves, even though these are old. These are old leaves here. Yeah? Newer ones got damage on them. We have to stop letting that happen. It spoils the look of the plants. And it also stops the plant probably ever going to a show or going to the competition benches, because it's just going to get marked down straight away with marks like that. And it will make judges highly suspicious as to what made those marks and are they still around. So your plant will be instantly disqualified if any bugs are found. That's it. Get it off the bench, you're out. 3 strikes, straight out. Anyway, good blooms and doing strange things, but growing. That's the important thing.
Now, the Alania Perforator, the notorious non-bloomer, was actually got at Malvern from Ecuagenera, so that would have been June 2017. So in December 2018, I'd had this plant a year and a half. It had grown a really good root system and pushed up 2 strong new growths at this point, which have matured. Did they bloom? Did they help? So we're sort of stuck with this at this particular point. If you look right at the rim of the pot, at the very, very front, you can just see the 2 new growths starting. So it's got 2 leads, it produced 2 mature bulbs which didn't bloom, and now it was having a go at another 2. So I believe this is still out of season. It's taking a long time to get to the point where those new growths need to start at the right time of year so that they can finish at the right time of year. Anyway, they'd started in December. And once we actually got to February, the 2 new growths were pushing on okay. You know, this has actually been taken out of its pot and repotted at this point, put back in the same size pot, but it was growing out of the pot. I was getting too many roots on the outside, so that had been repotted at that point. By the time we got to May, the 2 new growths are pushing on nicely, but as the leaves are unfurling, there's no sign of sheaths, but what we do have is a new root system generating from those front 2 leads. So the plant was pushing on quite nicely as a plant. And by the time we got to September, it was obvious these 2 new growths were not going to bloom. But nonetheless, it was sort of doing okay, but those latest 2 new growths were not as large as they should have been. Probably because it got disturbed. Right, standing well back to get this one in. This is a tall plant, a bit of a monster. And when we looked at this last, we had two nice new growths. Those two new growths are still pushing on nicely. Let's get you around here where you can grow up, not in a tangle. And the other one round here, just starting to open its leaf. Now this plant has a seasonal problem. It doesn't seem to want to adjust. Strictly speaking, it should grow its new growths from early in the spring through the growing season to maturity in the autumn. And then at that point it should not only have its leaf but its sheath. Then it rests. So during the drier winter period in the wild, this plant would be resting, and then the buds come at the start of the next season, or during the winter into the next season. Now mine's not doing that, it's not behaving. And this is one of the few plants of the project plants that's still on the list. And there's a reason for that, because I've had a brainwave. Might not work, but it's got to be worth a try. Because at the moment, the new growths are maturing at the wrong time of year. That may be why it's not blooming, because it's certainly a mature plant. And I've seen smaller plants than this with blooms on. So, the theory. If you remember what we've done with some of the other Cattleyas, we've cut the rhizome to encourage old eyes to either be made and grow or to push on. So how do I get a new growth at the right time of the year? We ignore the current two leads, we cut the rhizome farther back and try and encourage some growths to start farther back on the plant at the right time of year. Now this could be a miserable failure, but I think it's worth a try, even if I only get one. But as we've got two strong leads that have headed off from, let's see if I can get in there. We've got the base of the plant back here, yeah? Now this lead has pushed on, it's got 1, 2 and the new growth. That's enough. So by cutting it there, we might get something to happen at the base of some of the previous bulbs. And it's the same on the other lead. It starts at the back here, got a bulb here, and the new growth. I could cut that one as well. And that will leave the back of the plant with 1 leafless bulb and 4 leaved bulbs, this cluster in the middle here. That would be the back end of the plant. There's enough there to perhaps push some eyes. So I've got to think of the timing and look back on the history of this plant, which I've now got record of, which is good, to see when these new growths started, to work out how long they take to get to maturity, work backwards to get to a start point at a time of year when I can trigger some new growths. Now bearing in mind it takes a while. Once you've cut the rhizome, nothing happens for a while, and it can take anything from like 6 to 8 weeks before you get a result. So I've got to try and get that point in time worked out so that I can cut those rhizomes and then perhaps wait as much as 6 to 8 weeks before I get a result and a new growth starts, and allow that new growth to begin at the start of the growing season. That point in time is coming soon. Yeah? Start of the growing season, March, which is when the new project plants start. Well, if I want some new growths to be starting at that point, the rhizome needs to be cut 6 to 8 weeks prior. Now, although that's going to be the middle of the winter, I think the trigger mechanism is going to produce the eyes and push those eyes at the time of year when the days are getting longer and the temperatures are getting better. That's my theory. And it is nothing more than that, a theory, and it could be a miserable failure. But I'm determined to get this thing to bloom. Blooms are absolutely spectacular. I've just got to get it. I mean, you can Google the variety. There's lots of Alania Perforator named varieties. This one is a deep coloured one with rather splendid markings on it. There are some paler ones, some plainer ones, and with the one I'd really like to get is striata, I think it's called, which has got good colours on it but lovely veining as well. But I haven't come across it yet. So that's the work that's going to happen on this one. I don't believe these latest two growths, despite being nice and strong, I mean, this has got a hell of a root system. You know, it goes right down all through the pot, out the bottom of the pot, out the side of the pot. It's certainly not lacking in roots. Every new growth pushes another set of good roots. And the old ones are hanging in there too. It's got an excellent root system to support it. So that's my theory going on into next year. Obviously, when I get round to cutting the rhizomes, I'll film it, and that could even be included in the Project Orchids set for next year, because it'll be the start of this plant. And then we'll see what we can do. I'm determined to get this to bloom, but so far my new growths are pushing up at the wrong time of year. If I was in the southern hemisphere, it would be the right time of year, which is where this came from. This came from Ecuagenera at Malvern, southern hemisphere grower. And it just seems to want to refuse to get into my seasons, northern hemisphere, and quite far north as well. So we'll see what we can do with it. But I'm happy with the way it grows, happy with the root system. Everything about it is good, apart from the lack of blooms. So let's have a go and see if we can change that in the new year.
Now, the rescue Cattleya, I'll apologise in advance, there were two, and somehow or other I've got them muddled up. So we're looking at both of them. That shouldn't have happened, basically. The one I wanted to follow was this one, which did finally push up a new growth. Although rather small, it did at least manage to start growing, and it had produced a few roots. It was still not right. There's something fundamentally wrong with this plant. It was put in as a project plant to just see if I could ever get this thing going, based on the blooms, top left corner. It was worth trying for those blooms, because they're huge. Those were nearly 6 inches from top to bottom, but many, many years ago. So by the time we got to February, we decided to have a look at the other one. That's a mistake on my part, which is a shame, because obviously we're not progressing the same plant now. But as I said, there were two. This one was doing next to nothing. It had produced 1 or 2 roots and had an eye, but no new growths on it. And again, looking at the wrong one. So I won't say too much about this. Somehow or other I managed to get the plants muddled up. Bearing in mind they're not really that similar, quite honestly. So mistake on my part. Win some, lose some, and all that. Right, now we're back to the original one, and we can see a new growth pushing out. And some roots, but nonetheless, I'm not going to say any more about this, because there is no today picture. It's gone in the bin. I've had enough of it. So this one is now ceased to be. Right, this is my only species, Tolumnia Europhila. This performs quite well for me. It grows well. It's established a smashing root system, absolutely brilliant. And in December, what we were basically doing was maturing the latest fans. I'm reasonably confident that since I got this, which is a while ago, it's not dropped a leaf. So all the original fans are still there. Some of the leaves are looking a little tired in places. Those would be the oldest ones. But nonetheless, as a species, I was surprised this one grows so well. You normally get that sort of vigour with the hybrids. But in December, it had done blooming back in the summer, so it was basically pushing out growths at this particular point in time. Doing pretty good as well. Once we actually got to February, we'd started the process of producing 2 new spikes. I say process because this is a real don't hold your breath. Not only do they take an age to form their buds, they grow incredibly long. You're looking at 2/3 of a metre for these. They are very, very long spikes. But we had two. Now at this point in time, I believe it was actually in bloom. But because it's not a video clip, it's a still. You've got a picture of the blooms anyway. But those spikes were still there. So in May, we were probably forming buds actually around that time. Once we got to September, one spike's gone, so obviously that one had finished, and the fact that that one's still there probably meant it was still in bloom. Blooms do last a long time, and it is a branching spike. Not huge blooms, but very attractive. So let's see where we are with this one today. Right, well, the Tolumnia europhila, my only species, grows quite well for me. It's slowed up at the moment. Well, it's probably the colder weather in the winter. And I'm just trying to think. The best looking fan on this is this one at the front now. And I don't actually think that one's bloomed. So that may well be where the next spike comes from. You can see the dead spike in the middle off to that the fan to the left. There's an old spike there from a fan that's died off. Another old spike there from a fan that's died off. So being a species, it doesn't hold its fans forever. But what I'm looking for is the new growth. So we've got one there, the front of the shot now, and another little one heading off up the back there that have recently started. So we'll be looking for some spikes later in the year, and then we won't hold our breath waiting for them to grow and bloom. But it's done a good root system. Some of these roots are active at the moment. We've got green tips heading off in various directions. Some new ones starting from the base of that fan at the front. So it's a good root system. It's well attached. It's not actually tied on. It's just hanging on by its own means. And yeah, it should progress again. It's not a fast grower, I would say, but it does nonetheless progress each year. I must admit, this section over this side, having lost a couple of older fans, it sort of, to me, looks smaller than it used to be. But then it has got new fans to grow on. So we'll see what, as and when, this decides to bloom. But it grows well for me. I'm pleased with it. As I say, you can't, in most cases, you can't expect a species to have the same vigour as some of the hybrids, because the hybrids have a selection process that normally creates something more vigorous than the originals that went into it. Doesn't always work, but that's the plan, obviously, to get a plant that grows well and blooms well, as opposed to some of the species that are perhaps more difficult to bloom. But Tolumnias are not difficult to grow. Oh, hello. Fluffy Cat's come to say hello. You been out in the rain? Dopey cat. He hates the sound of the rain, so he runs away in the rain. Ugh, you're all wet. Go away, wet cat. Right, where was I? Yes, so they're not difficult to grow, but the most important thing I've found, if you want them to progress well, is the roots need to dry fast. How you grow them, what you grow them on, doesn't matter that much. They'll grow on almost anything. Bearing in mind where they come from, they grow on twigs. So they're growing on next to nothing. They're just hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and they manage okay. Given that the Caribbean area does get the odd light wind now and again, you know, and a little bit of heavy rain now and again, and they do okay. So that's the thing. Just make sure that you've got them in a place where the roots can dry quickly, and then keep up with it. In a natural environment, they get morning dew at the very least, and some periods that's their only moisture that they get, but they get that every day, first thing in the morning, and then they could even be subject to sun. So they're adapted for that, these big thick fleshy leaves. It's all good stuff. They've got their environment worked out. Roots run along under the twigs and catch the morning dew, and they've adapted to take that moisture in fast before it evaporates. So it gets it into the plant, and with these thick fleshy leaves they can store it for a while. So they're capable of tolerating drought.
I wouldn't recommend that you give them that drought, but they can take it. But, you know, growing season time, these need watering every day. Every single day. Mounted like that, yeah. So, coming on well. Pleased with its progress. I've had it a long time, and quite honestly, when I first got it, I didn't expect to be able to grow it very well because it's a species. I don't know why I got that in my head, but just out of the corner of my eye. In this corner lives the cymbidium, and a while ago I showed some little traces on one of the blooms, so it means there's a tiny slug or snail somewhere in that plant that I still haven't found. That may have been its demise. If it's managed to crawl up there, which is bone dry, it would have totally dehydrated and desiccated, possibly before it managed to escape. So it might have actually sorted itself out, because I still haven't found it. No, sidetracked. So that's the last one, and yeah, see how we go from here.
Now, this Tolumnia was one of the Christmas lot, as they're endearingly called, trade name Mo04, I suspect. But these were a job lot from a friend, and this was got at the Christmas do in 2018. So it was brand new at this point and mounted. Very, very few roots and not a strong plant. It did have a new growth on it, but most of that job lot are now gone. I think I've got 2 out of the 5 left. They just weren't very good plants. The person I got them from, friend Lynn, her 5 didn't do that well either. I think she's only got a couple left. So these were not good plants. But nonetheless, at this particular point, it was a viable plant. It had a few roots, it was green, and it had what looked like a weak new growth pushing up. So there was hope for this to actually pull on. By the time we got to February, it had actually bloomed on that really small weak growth. That may have been a mistake, but nonetheless the blooms were quite attractive. I was quite pleased, but that's a weak spike on a weak growth on a weak plant. Why I did that, I'm not sure. By the time we got to May, blooms were still there, surprisingly, but look at the state of the leaves now. They're desiccating. It still hasn't got a good root system, and that spike shouldn't be there. It's as simple as that. Weak plants should not be allowed to bloom. And by the time we got to September, we really have got a Tolumnia going downhill in a bad way. You can see where this is going, can't you? Yes, it is no more, it has ceased to be. Night of the Long Knives got this one, so this one's now gone.
So there we go then. That was part 3's final updates. 1 part left to go, part 4, which is the cooler, shadier types. I wonder how many we'll have left out of those. Anyway, as far as the losses in this set were concerned, the rescue Cattleya was predictable. It was highly unlikely that was going to be kept long term. The Tolumnia just wasn't a good plant to start with, although I did think I could rescue it. As it happened, it didn't work out. Such is life growing orchids. It doesn't always work out. But given that rescue Cattleya's bloom, you can go back and have a look at it in the top left corner of that section, I think this is a pretty good replacement. And Beatrix said that when she got this for me, she had that in mind. Now that's forward planning. And it worked. This is a beauty. So anyway, I'll see you in part 4 in the not too distant future. As I said, I hope you're enjoying this series, coming to an end now for this year. And the new set of plants is already published for the next set of Project Orchids starting in March. But let's get this lot finished first. See you next time.